Up next is the little magnifying glass button, and I just totally call it all sorts of wrong names. But what this button will do is it is a quick stop for your 10 zoom into whatever it is so that you can nail focus on exactly the eye or exactly whatever you want it to be on. Because sometimes it's a little bit hairy what you're trying to shoot, and then it's like, is it really in focus? And then you can zoom in and be like, it's in focus. And next up is the M function button that just toggles all of your different options that you can change quickly and see, like, it's pretty much that black screen except in a reel, and it makes it kind of easy to switch between those. I don't use it a lot, and I figure a lot of you probably don't use it because it's just easier to pull your face away and then press the buttons. But if you figure this out, it can help you to change stuff on the fly. And the final one is the rate button. What does the rate button do? Well, it's pretty simple. You just go into your photos and you literally press the button rate when you're looking through the photos that you've taken, and it rates them. And what's really cool though is that when you put it into Lightroom, the rate button, or the rate whatever you've done it to, will stick with that photo. And it's kind of nice that way, because then you can rate in camera and then go over to the computer and know which ones you liked in advance. 1.1, and that is using the joystick to move the AF function. And as you fire and use it, there's another one, 1.2, which is using the touch and drag settings. I'll let you decide which one is best for you, but it's something that you can customize, and what the joystick will do is it moves the AF point around in one shot. Very quickly, actually, which is very nice, because usually I feel like it just kind of like lags behind the speed it needs to be, and it's like tick, tick, tick. But this one goes whoop, 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 and it's there. The touch and drag does the exact same thing, except you're touching and dragging when your face is up to the viewfinder. Your decision on which one works best for you, but they're both good options. The joystick option can be found and operated under the orange camera under the number 3 option for button adjustments, and the touch and drag settings can be found under AF number 1. Next up is customizing your copyright settings, and this helps you so that your copyright information is already being put in the metadata for every photo you take. So if your photos end up somewhere they shouldn't, you have your copyright information. When I bought my R secondhand, I didn't change the copyright information, and so the previous owner took about 5,000 photos that he never took. So go ahead and change that when you get and pick up your new camera. The copyright information adjustments can be found under the wrench number 5. So I hardly ever use the AF button, whereas a sports photographer would use it all the time. I enjoy using the point autofocus a lot, and eye focus, and I kind of switch between those two, sometimes rather rapidly depending on what it is. And switching the AF on to simply being eye focus instead of, the one shot, then it's good to go. When I want to shoot something that's an inanimate object and I want to choose specifically where it is, I use the regular shutter, and when I want to shoot somebody's face, I just simply use the autofocus. And this is also the section where you can really get into all your dials and what you want them to do and everything, and I feel like there's an expanded number of options that you have in comparison to the Canon EOS R in this camera for customizations. Next up is for the auto ISO. Now this is super nice when you're running around an event and you just want to be able to focus on what type of shutter speed you need and what type of aperture you need. And I find that especially outside, the Canon R6 overexposes all of my highlights. So what I've done is when I put it on auto, I also put the compensation down one stop, and that usually fixes about, I'd say, 90% of the problems that this camera has overexposing when in auto ISO. So in this video, I'm going to go over the AF settings, which is the purple AF under the second tab in the menu system. And there is one in here that I'm going to show you that's going to eat your battery up if you have it on, and then some of these how to get your autofocus to work better. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about the setups that you can have for your buttons to make it quicker to take photos that look better. So first up, we have one shot and servo. The one shot will then, after you hold the trigger, it will hold that position and your focus point. The servo, wherever that focus point is at, it will be focusing on there always. One shot is really good for studios, and servo is really good for moving objects. So the first settings that you can mess around with is the AF focus points, and they are pretty straightforward and easy to use. And we're going to go over how each of these different focus points uses affects your performance of the camera. The first one spot is the narrowest focus point that you can have, followed by one spot, which is the larger and the single use of a single focus point. The expanded is for a little bit extra for moving objects up, down, left, and right. It will help you focus even though it's a moving object and you may or may not be trailing the subject as they move through the frame. The following one is just an expanded version of that, once again used for moving subjects. Then there's the zone AF, and this is just there's three options. You have the area, linear, and horizon options, and this is giving control over to the camera to decide where the focus points will be at. And the focus is determined not only by the nearest subject, but faces, motion, and distance. All right, next up is under AF3, and this is all the cases that you can use. Case number 1 is versatile multi-purpose settings, moving for all general purposes, pretty much. Case number 2 is continuous tracking of the subject and ignoring obstacles. So if you have somebody that's doing tennis and their arm's going to be coming in front of their face, it's going to continue focusing where it was and ignore the object that's now obstructing it. Case number 3, instantly focus on subject and suddenly entering AF positions. This is good for cycling, biking, if you're doing anything with motorsports and all that type of stuff where things are coming into and out of the frame incredibly fast. Then case number 4 is for all sorts of rapidly moving things that are like dancing and rapid sports and wrestling and all that stuff where things will suddenly be going in a different direction all of a sudden. Then case A is just an autofocus setting. You can then further customize these if you discover that it is not quite doing it for you by simply tapping on them and either making them lock on more or less. And this is going to be something that you're going to find for your own personal shooting styles over time. And now for the battery eater, it is the continuous AF focus, and that is always going to be searching, always going to be searching. So whether you have your finger on the focus button or the trigger, then no matter what, it's just going to be searching, and that's going to eat up your battery and also put a little bit more wear and tear on your lens. Another thing to look out for is having the touch shutter, so whenever you touch the back screen, it takes the picture. That might also be giving you trouble with getting your focus points and messing around with it. I know that whenever I've turned it on, I've always instantly regretted it and turned it right off because I want to move the focus point around and it's just taking pictures instead of moving the focus point. Alright, and now some configurations that are going to help you probably use your camera much faster and easier to take better photos faster. The first one is going to be the drag and touch option, which is going to allow you to then use a part of the screen as if it was like the joystick, and that's going to allow you to move it around. And the next is to customize your buttons, and that can be found over in the orange camera number 3 and under button customization, and you just switch the joystick over to a AF mover, I guess is what that's going to be, and you switch it over into that, and you are then able to use your joystick to move the AF point around. With that being said, there is one that I left out, and it is the adjustment compensation and the AF touch and drag, and we're going to go over those two right now. Alright, what AF touch and drag does is it allows you to move while you're up in the viewfinder. It allows you to move around the focus point using the screen as if the screen were a joystick. It's pretty useful, pretty neat, and the way to set that up is you go into the AF file number 1 and the very bottom touch and drag settings, enable, and then absolute, and I have mine set up to the right hand side, absolute and relative. What that means is that it's going to be the absolute position that you put your finger, or the relative, as if you're just swiping it, it will go in that direction. And then the active part of the screen that is workable, I put it to the right hand side so that my face isn't actually touching the screen and moving my focus points. This is something to play around with and see if it's for you or not. If not, you know, at least it was something new you tried. Next is adjusting auto ISO and the compensation thereof. I find that my pictures tend to be a little bit brighter than I would like them to be when I'm in auto ISO. So if you go into your info right in here, and this screen that just popped up, we'll talk about that in a minute, how to make sure that you're actually writing to both your cards. So when you have auto, you go down to this Q on the right hand side and make sure that your ISO is on auto, and then you're allowed to, or then you can adjust this exposure compensation. And this will mean that instead of being exactly in the middle where it normally would go, it is going to then bring your ISO down a little bit so you don't overexpose. And I put it down by 1 stop. Alright, next up we're going to go into how to get your camera to write to both the cards, because I shot a wedding and they were only running to one of the cards when I thought it was running to both the cards, and that's not a very fun situation to be in when you finally discover that only one of your cards has all your photos on it. So in the tool number 1, you go into record function card and folder select. So you go under to your photos and then record to multiple. Just like that. Standard will only write to the original one in card slot number 1, and you can do the same with your video recordings as well. Next, we're going to go into stabilization of the camera, because the R6 has a wonderful, I think it's 5 stops of stabilization inside with IBIS, and this will turn off every time unless you select it to turn on always when shooting photos. So under the camera Red 7, you go into IS image stabilization mode, and then you do still photos, IS, always on, only 4-shot. Yeah, so always on, and that will keep the digital stabilization on and on and on, so that you're getting this, because it's awesome and it's useful. Unless you're on a tripod, that is pretty much the only time that you want to turn this off. Is just press info while you go there. And that will toggle you through most of the settings that I'm going to be talking about today. Now, in order to customize these and make them more personal, or usually when the histogram is there in the factory settings, it is very large, so if you want to shrink that so it's not obscuring your view as you're taking these photos, we're going to continue on to how to do stuff like that. But info will get you started. Now, the viewfinder and the back panel do pretty much the exact same thing, but they're separate from one another. So whatever you have on here shows up there, except for the settings. You can then toggle them as well by pressing info. To adjust these settings, well, let's first go over the exposure simulation, which is pretty much the reason why mirrorless cameras are so awesome. So if you go into your menu, exposure simulation enabled, if it's not enabled, so there's situations when you would disable the exposure simulation, but those usually are in studio settings and when you're using flash. This allows you to see exactly what the photo will be like when it comes out. So as you adjust your settings, so your ISO and shutter speed, your photo, and it will show you exactly what it will be like. So when you press that button, whatever was on the back screen will be your photo. That's what exposure simulation. Next up is photo review. So having the photo review up top, and this is all under the red camera number 7. The photo image review allows you to review the photo inside the viewfinder. It's normally set to disabled, but if you don't want to pull your face away to be able to review your photos every time, this is how you do that. Next, in order to customize these settings that show up inside your viewfinder when you press info, you come down to shooting info display. Go into that, and then screen info settings, and this allows you to toggle which ones you want to show up. Then you can come down here to the grid and you can set it to whatever you want, off or the 3x3. Then the histogram display is what's most useful for adjusting it, and that will be the brightness or RGB, which means you can see the red, green, and blue, which can be useful depending on what you're trying to do, but for the most part, white balance is pretty good inside this camera. Display size, I always put it to small so there's not as much obscuring the view. And what that is, if you come in here, you see how small this is in that corner. And when you adjust it to be the larger one, it simply takes up a lot more room inside your photo. And the histogram is awesome because you can see exactly where the exposure is and if you're overexposing or underexposing, because sometimes it can be difficult to see exactly what it is from the screen. Leading us into our next setting that we're going to adjust, which is going to be the brightness of the back screen or the brightness of your viewfinder. And this helps you so that if you are chronically overexposing or underexposing, just putting the brightness to the other side of the spectrum will allow you to be able to compensate for that and take the photos more accurately and stop under and overexposing. As well, the histogram helps. Viewfinder brightness can be found in the wrench under number 3 and viewfinder brightness. So if you go in there and you adjust it lower, then you will be seeing a darker image, which will then usually push you to increase the ISO in your image, therefore exposing it more. And the vice versa is also true. As well, you can select in this menu under the wrench number 3, under screen/viewfinder display. If you go in there, right now it's automatically set up to switch between and toggle between the viewfinder up top and the screen below. So when you go into viewfinder only or screen only, then you will only have the screen available to use or the viewfinder used. Depending on how you want to use your camera in that situation, that is what it will do. Next, we're going to adjust the actual performance of your viewfinder, and that is done under the red camera number 8. So when you go into there, display performance, you have a power saving mode and a smooth mode. Now what this does is increases the refresh rate on your viewfinder, and this will allow you to see more accurately during sports and stuff like that. Not very useful for a studio, but is very, very useful for sports. I'm not exactly sure what they were. I know 60 hertz was the max on the R. I'm not sure. Next is the red beam of death, turning it off for when you're shooting live living subjects, because they don't like having a red beam blasted into their face while you're taking photos of them. So to turn this AF assist beam firing off, you just simply go into AF purple number 2 and AF assist beam firing and turn it off. I find this to not really be all that useful, even when you're not shooting living subjects. So here's some button configurations that you can do that are going to help you with shooting and choosing the AF faster. So by moving away from the front trigger to using the AF to toggle your focus point and the actual taking of focus before you take the picture, you're able to do that. I don't use this. I use this for face focus, and because I use a lot of one shot, and I just use the front trigger anyways. And I have this button set up for the ISO so that I can trigger and toggle it really quick and use this to adjust it on the fly. For a lot of people, they want to have servo on and have this as their autofocus and this as their face focus, and it's really just a personal choice on how you want to do that. And the last one is that if you want to really zoom in and make sure that you have focus on like the eye exactly or whatever you want, so if you're using that specific spot that is the smallest focus point, you can press this one, you can toggle in up to 10 times zoom, so you can really see exactly where you're at to nail the autofocus. The reasons that you might not be firing and having the flash go off is for a couple of reasons. One might be that you just aren't in the right shutter mode. It will not fire in silent shutter mode. So you're going to have to use either the first electronic curtain or the mechanical shutter modes, and then your flash is going to fire. Another option is that you just have not enabled the external flash, and that is simply just going into the settings under the red camera number 2 and enabling it. And the third is that the pilot might simply not be ready to fire, and that might be a reason that you're not getting it. Your batteries are low, you've been using it for a while, or you're trying to take photos too fast with this flash. And when the red light is on, that means you can fire and it's ready to go. If it isn't red, that means it's probably not enough juice ready to fire it off. So here's the really cool part, and then I have 2 more things after it that are going to help you with the external flash. Remapping one of your buttons to be a quick button for all these stuff that you can do on this back part. All you have to do is go into and remap one of your buttons. Mine is the star that I'm using right now, and when you press this button while the Speedlight is attached, it will allow you to control it from the camera. I'm not sure if the R did this, but I'm pretty sure the R5 does this, and it's pretty freaking cool. When you go in and you can just adjust all these things from the manual mode, how intense the flash setting is, and then also the millimeter that it's shooting at. This is really cool because it speeds it up. I always hate fumbling around with the buttons on the back because they're just hard and clunky to deal with sometimes, and being able to just use a button and go into the screen so much faster. Last is to increase your AF ability. Just going and turning off the simulated exposure is going to help you, because when it is in simulated exposure, it's going to show you all black, and that's not really helpful, and then it bumps up the ISO so that it can find where it's at and then drops it back down to what you wanted. So if you just have turn off the exposure simulation, then you won't have that moment where it's trying to search for that AF point. And then that leads us to the other one, which is the red firing assist beam, which is the AF assist beam. And you might want to go in and turn this off or on depending on how bad your lighting is, and if you're willing to flash the people that you're going to shoot at your event, or if you even have people in it, then by all means turn on the red beam of death, the AF firing assist beam, which, you know, that's a personal choice. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. We have all sorts of different tutorials, tips, tricks, and things that are going to help you shoot on your Canon mirrorless cameras. Thank you for watching. My name is Daniel. I've been a motor mouth, but it's because I kind of tried to shoot this video really fast. Thank you for watching. Take care.